ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟರ್ ಸೆಕ್ರೆಟರಿ ಆಫ್ ಇತ್ತು. ಬಟ್ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಇದು ಮಾಡಿ ತೆಗೆದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಬ್ಯಾಡ್ ಹೆಸರಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ದೇ ultimately ended up getting a very bad name because of this incident, because they weren't winning the narrative. But they tried their very best. In Udupi recently, it's a universal playbook. There were 3 girls who filmed other girls in a washroom. But because the 3 girls who were filming were from a minority religion, and because the victims were from a majority religion, ಆ ಕೇಸನ್ನು ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ರು. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅ ಕ್ರೈಮ್ ಆಯ್ತಾ. ಇನ್ ದ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನ್ ನೋ ವುಮನ್ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಬಿ ಸರಪ್ಟಿಷಿಯಸ್ಲಿ filmed. It is one of the rights, one of the fundamental rights that women have to privacy in this country, and it's considered a crime. ಆದರೂ ಪೊಲೀಸ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಇದು ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ರಿಪೋರ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಬರ್ತದೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಆ ಹುಡುಗಿಯರಿಗೆ ವೆನ್ ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ರಿಪೋರ್ಟೆಡ್ ಟು ದ police didn't want to file a case, and the university just asked them to write an apology and leave it off for a crime. They're just asking for an apology letter. And when the crime came up and the crime was discussed, adu misinformation anta helidru. So I was one of the people who was actively writing about it on social media. She's spreading misinformation anta helidru while I was quoting a news article. Or misinformation spread ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾಳೆ ಅಂತ. Then when the issue becomes so big, they couldn't say okay misinformation ಅಂತ ಏನು ಹೇಳಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ವಿಷಯ ಹೊರಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗಿದೆ. They said it was a prank. The Home Minister of Karnataka is saying it's a prank. When that did not work, they had to start a CID investigation. They had to take suo motu cognizance. They had to file an FIR. They had to file everything. But then they send media houses. India Today goes to Udupi and takes the interview, not of the victims, of the perpetrators. Can you imagine? Criminals get prime time, this thing. And you know what they're saying? There are 3 girls. One girl is saying, now madle illa anta. Another girl is saying, prank anta madiddu anta. And the host, instead of catching that these 2 girls are lying, one is saying, we've done it and it's a prank. Another is saying, we didn't do anything. Instead of catching it and, catching them red hand on camera, she says, friendship has no religion. That was the headline of that show. So I'm not saying that friendship has religion or not. This is not a debate about that. It is about how narrative is being used so dangerously to push what is convenient. Aita, it is inconvenient for them to process that case because the current Karnataka government will lose its vote bank. So they're willing to say anything about it. So having me as president was inconvenient. So they were willing to say anything about me. Anything. They said, she comes from... They called me Islamophobic because I come from coastal Karnataka ante. Coming from coastal Karnataka makes you Islamophobic. That was the logic they were giving. And they said my election campaign was funded by Narendra Modi ante. Yakandre, I'll tell you, this is very funny. Yakandre, they said, ಅವಳು ಕಲ್ತದ್ದು ಮಣಿಪಾಲ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿ. ಅವರ ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟಿಗೆ ಹೋದರೆ ಮೋದಿ ಅವರ ಫೋಟೋ ಉಂಟಂತೆ. ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೋವಿಡ್ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ there was all these get vaccinated and all these posters which every university had to carry on their website. ಆಯ್ತಾ, ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಸಣ್ಣದು ಮೋದಿ ಅವರ ಫೋಟೋ ಉಂಟು. ಎವ್ರಿ ವ್ಯಾಕ್ಸಿನ್ ಕ್ಯಾಂಪೇನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಇಟ್. ಯಾವ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಇದು ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟ್ ನೋಡಿದ್ರು ಸಿಕ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಯಾರು ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಪ್ರೆಸಿಡೆಂಟ್ ಆದಿದ್ರು ಮೋದಿ ಶುಡ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಫಂಡೆಡ್ ದ ಕ್ಯಾಂಪೇನ್. ಸೊ such senseless arguments they come up with, such senseless arguments. You know why they call me transphobic? It's written in the book. I think you should read the book. I've priced it also very low so that young people can afford it. So it's actually very interesting how they use narrative against you. I had written a post. So they claim India is a patriarchal country. Indiaದಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಮೆನಿಗೆ ರೈಟ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, ವಿಮೆನಿಗೆ ಇದಿಲ್ಲ. Oxford, being a 1,000-year-old institution, until 100 years ago didn't allow women to get degrees. Just imagine how patriarchal they are. But they're accusing India of being patriarchal, while we have, from the Vedic age, we have, Gargi, we have so many, sages who are women, who are educated, who are imparting, who are doing groundbreaking study and, philosophy, theologies in the past time. But here there's a civilization which didn't allow women until 100 years ago. But anyway, coming to the point, it was 2021, I'm running for president, and it was 100 years of women at Oxford. It was just 100 years of women at Oxford. So I made a post celebrating women and everything. And I didn't want to leave the trans people out of it. So I said, sending love to all the women, trans women, and the men who support us, Santa. Aita, namge India dalli we think there are 3 genders. We always see trans, women and men. So I didn't want to leave any gender out. I feel when you celebrate women, you should celebrate men also, because there are exceptional men who support women. So I was celebrating everybody. Most inclusive post anta ನೀವು ಎಣಿಸ್ತೀರಿ. But I was called transphobic. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ apparently you can't say trans women. You are othering them ante. So when you say women, trans women are also inside that ante. So if you say women and trans women, you are transphobic ante. So this was the definition they came up with. You can look at it. You can literally look at it and you will laugh. And there were other people saying, okay, you said trans women, but you should have considered all other genders. Like, neutral, and then there's gender neutral. So many pronouns are there. So many other genders are there. So all the LGBTQIA+, everybody I should have named, it seems there. So there's one bunch who thinks I should have named everybody in it. And there's one bunch which thinks naming them is phobia, is othering them. They can't decide what I should do, whether I should name them or not, and they're calling me phobic. So that is the level to which they're ready to come to call you names and to remove you just because you're going to bring meaningful change, and you're not ready to be that brown person who brings diversity on the table. It's very convenient. Get 4 brown people, click a picture, put it on the website and say we are inclusive, we are accessible, we are everything. It's so convenient to say this. But unfortunately, I was not willing to just sit on a chair and say, okay, you have your first Indian president, wow. We were going to create a change. So unfortunately, this is the level to which they will come and persecute you. It's literally like calling Modi ji fascist. If you go abroad, everybody will say Modi ji is fascist. Yaake fascist? I don't know. Why is he fascist? Can you prove in a court of law? No, you can't prove it. They can't prove I was racist. They can't prove I was transphobic. They can't prove I was anti-Semitic. In fact, there's a trans person who belongs to the LGBTQ community who's written on, Twitter saying her post is not transphobic, but they don't want to listen to her. They're like, no, but we've taken offense. Despite not belonging to the community. They're like, adilla, ninge offense adre adilla, namgagide. So that is the level. Ashtu idu eno heltiri. The war of narrative is so strong, and these labels stick, kaita, because I think we're all genuinely nice people. If somebody says, oh, he's being racist, we don't try to question the victim. We don't victim shame. As a community, I think as a global community, we don't victim shame anybody. If anybody comes and says, nanotige idaitu, I was wronged, nan jote higaitu, hagaitu, we will believe them. We won't say, yakaitu, helu, agirlikkilla. We don't say that, because as a community, we are compelled, we are trained to believe in the goodness of this world, not in the evil of this world. That's why, unfortunately, these antisocial elements, they have weaponized these good words like racism, transphobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. I'm sure none of us are all of these things. Nobody wants to be Islamophobic. Nobody wants to be racist or anti-Semitic, and nobody is. So they use these words because once you stick it to somebody, nobody is going to question yaake neen hige heltiddi anta, because nobody wants to question the victim. Aita adannu weaponize ಮಾಡಿ ದಾಳಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ in this whole it is also very ironic. They accuse me of patriarchy. Me, as a female president, how can you accuse me of patriarchy? Again the religion was, oh, she is a vegetarian, vegetarians are brahminical patriarchy. It's a buzzword. Vegetarians are Brahmin ante. So brahminical patriarchy. I can be any vegetarian. Anybody can be vegetarian. Why are you being casteist about it? How can you accuse a woman of patriarchy? How can you do that? You have to read that post by that history professor. He says she believes in tenets of patriarchy. How do I believe in patriarchy? I mean, goddammit, they have such few women presidents. I'm one of the first Indian presidents, and the Indians put a woman in that position. They didn't send a man, they put a woman in that position. That is everything that they need to believe, that India is perhaps matriarchal and not patriarchal. And I don't know if you know this, coastal Karnataka, it is a matriarchal society. The women, they succeed and they take all property, and it's ghar jamai system there. So it's actually, I come from a matriarchal society, and I'm being accused of patriarchy. So that is the level to which, these accusations go, these narratives go, and that's how they stick. So yeah, next question. Yeah.
I wanted to know your take on preserving, restoring, and
Well, I think history is very important. Those who forget history are bound to like repeat all of their mistakes and end up at ground zero. I think again the Jewish example, every Jewish person is so proud of being Jewish because every Jewish kid is taught what their ancestors went through during Holocaust. They say your ancestor had to survive this. They went through horrible things for you to survive today. That's why everybody's so proud of who they are. In fact, even women who marry outside their community, they have a rule that you need to convert to, the Jewish faith. I know a Hindu who's married to a Jewish lady and he converted to Judaism because it's such an important part to them. And I think atrocity, that kind of keeps you rooted to your identity more than anything else, atrocity literature. And I think teaching kids about, okay, Vedadalli idu heltare, adu heltare, namma samskriti idu adu, that kids won't relate with. If you say your ancestors, went through hell and back and, death and whatnot, then they will relate more. Because it's a way to bind yourself to that root, which had to fight everything to keep you alive. So that sense of gratitude comes in automatically. So I think that is essential, very essential to have history written in its true sense and for it to be narrated to generations with that kind of alacrity. Another thing is, I feel also history is also written by the winners, Aita. History is not an account of what happened. History is not an account. It's not a story of what happened. It's the story of the winner. So you need to be very careful what story you believe in. If you believe in a history written by others, then you seriously need to question if you also believe in what they've written about you and their own ancestors. Because nobody wants to say that, okay, we were bad and that's why you're in what shape we are. They'll say, we did our best, but we couldn't improve you guys because you guys are bad. That's the story they'll tell you. They'll say, you were so backward that despite our best efforts, we couldn't change you and we had to, leave you poor or whatever. So I think we also need to be very careful about who's written that story. And I think by the end of the day, it's just up to us to take charge of our story and to write it the way that we know what our ancestors went through. Illandre will just end up with the white man's history, version of things, or the, whatever, the West version of things, or that colonial perspective on things. Yes. Okay.
So, as you talked about Jews,
yeah.
I would like to go back to the history and see what they have done with their monasteries. So,
with
monasteries.
Monasteries, okay.
Yeah, like they have set up monastery in when Turks started invading them. I think they had crusades that they fought to get back Palestine or Jerusalem. So once they have done it, they have set up monasteries, which are centers of learning and centers of spreading Christianity. So they started converting people and they started doing a lot of they were talking as monastery as a center of learning. But do you want to throw some light on why the Hindu temples at this moment, after the colonization, when since 1947, why the temples aren't became a center of learning, but rather a center of religion?
Well, I think most importantly, it's because of this sort of centralized approach they have to religion. I think, at least in Christianity, the Vatican kind of dictates the whole structure. Not all of the structure, of course, there are many facets which are independent, churches. There's a Protestant church and all of that. But they do have a central thing that dictates this. And there are, I think there are close to 100 Christian countries. I don't know. I'm not very sure. There must be above 50 for sure. There are many Christian countries. Let's stick to many. And there's a diktat that comes from that centralized structure, which is irrespective of the government in power in those countries. And they have consistently fought to keep that independence of religion and religious structures alive. I think that is something we didn't do. Even today, we are still fighting to free temples. And as long as we don't have an organizational structure that is independent of government control, that sort of movement, that sort of change will not happen. If it does, if temples are, kind of free, then that network kind of then ends up, building other networks and stuff like that. And I think there's also lack of awareness. We are as a result of colonization, also reduced to this Bhangra Garba kind of community. We also see temple as a point of puja, puraskar, dan, not as a point of getting together, sharing ideas. So that thought process also needs to change. So there's so much to change. We need to revert back to a lot of the old things. But I think independence is key. As long as there's no independence, the resources are tied up. There's barely very little we can do. And it's kind of interesting because I think they've also used religion as a tool. For us, religion was never a tool. I think also it depends on the way we look at religion. Because we are taught Vasudeva Kutumbakam and everything, we think all other religions work like our religion does. That they also have similar level of tolerance, acceptance for other people's practices. Unfortunately, that is not true. And there is a deeper understanding required. And we have never in our history weaponized religion as a way to perpetuate anything. But they've always used that as a point to do things. First, they set up a church, convert the church into a school. Then the school becomes, there's a hospital nearby. And then the sort of, conversion or whatever follows in close pursuit. And this is something that has happened globally during crusades as well. They all became centers of spreading things. But I don't think we've ever weaponized religion in that sense, because we have a very different perspective of religion. We have it as a point of self-realization, a point of achieving that, self-awareness, growth, of doing selfless service. So there's a change of perspective as well that we don't understand when it comes to non-polytheistic faiths, Abrahamic faiths. So that understanding also we don't have of how these centers get used. And I don't think we are up to doing that. But I think definitely freeing temples and freeing up the resources would be point one. Yes. Okay. Last question, I hope. Yeah.
Ma'am, as we speak about the history, as you said about the educational institutions like books, speaking about our history.
Yeah.
So, what about the teachers who are literally the source of imparting knowledge to the kids? Now we are in college, so we're not in school anymore.
Yeah.
So we don't have like specific books which we are supposed to read. They're like usually articles or referred books by the colleges.
Yes.
So what about them? Like in my college, I've seen, I study in St. Joseph's University. So there I've seen that most of the teachers, they try to put down our culture in a very easy way. So they be like, in our culture, like before, we had these 4 divisions, Shudras, Vaishyas and Kshatriyas and Brahmins. So they put down saying that we had these 4 divisions and Shudras were always kept in, they were not given that position, and now they are like, they're related to the SCs, STs and the other Dalit communities, and they always be like, so I've seen the students in my class, they've started developing this sort of negative or not hatredness, but something, a negative conception about Hinduism and the Hindu culture which we follow, which it makes a narrative that Hinduism is being very orthodox or something like that. So if you're following Hinduism, it's like you're not being non-secular, which is not a part of our country. So how do you tackle when the teachers itself are teaching kids something like that?
Well, I think it's problem is very deep, but it's also because of the, again, colonization of the whole idea of caste as well. Caste is a colonial construct. It's Varna, and Varna means mobility. So you need to give the example of Valmiki, who transcended Varna. And I think you can, defeat these things by giving examples in ancient India, where people were so mobile between different varnas, and it was not this rigid structure where people were confined to one thing and they were not subjugated. In fact, caste atrocities started and they were accelerating during occupation of Bharat, during the Mughal and, during the British occupation. Before that, it was this very fluid social structure, more like an occupational thing, that, people who are indulged in this occupation, they belong to this varna, but every varna had so much respect. the artisans, they were so respected. Shudras were so respected. They were like, there were some great artists who were part of that community, and, they were all up in arms, and it was their, art that brought money to our country. And they were all super respected. I think it's essential for us to rediscover those points in history, to have all these examples of people who have transcended their varna, and to explain varna as more of a family occupation thing that used to exist. People used to stick to their family occupation, but there were people who transcended this when they didn't want to think. There are so many people who picked up Kshatriya dharma. There are so many people who picked up the Brahmana dharma because they wanted to study, they wanted to write. Valmiki is a great example that you can give. So you can tell them that it was not this rigid class system, which is actually a gift of the British to us. Also before that, actually the atrocity started much before that. But it was, the term caste was coined around, the British era, because they are used to this class system. Even if you go abroad now, if you go to the UK specifically, I didn't know this. There's this whole upper class, working class system. So if and you can't change these things. If you're born upper class, you're born upper class. If you're working class and you make money, you're still working class. You're not upper class. So it's a very rigid class system that, you're upper class or you're like working class. But you can say that, okay, the Varna system is a mobile system. It's not like this upper class, working class system that you have in the West, that they then used to appropriate the indigenous way of, dividing different occupations and roles in society, which was mobile. It was not rigid. So I think you need to come up with those arguments, and, you can literally take them on. There's a book I'll recommend to you, and I think you can literally just, distribute it to everybody and be like, know more about this. And of course, the caste problem happened, and our society is victim to that now. But it was, it was created by this whole intellectual warfare that our people went through for centuries. And then there's a problem. I won't say that there's no problem, that even today we are all mobile we don't practice the Varna system because of that. There is casteism because of the kind of, misappropriation, appropriation that happened later on. So that is why we have all these atrocities that we see. That is why people have this very misconstrued idea of what a caste is. And all these atrocities happen because of that. Because we were made to think of it as in a certain way that was not original to the dharma. So I think that is very essential for you to bring that out and say that, okay, these are two different things. And of course, we acknowledge that bad things are happening, but these bad things are happening because of this. So I think that's the way to kind of retake things. And I think we need to be sensitive to also communities who have faced atrocities, caste-based atrocities, because they can't see all this, right? Because they are victims of something and that becomes central to them. So we need to be more patient in the way that we engage with them as well, if, they've been victims of something like that. So I think there are divided sensitivities in our community as well, and they're not to blame for it, It is the situation to blame for. So we need to be very sensitive in the way that we address it with them and the way we take it up with them. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's a very, very relevant talk for us from the time when Bharat is moving towards becoming the Vishwa Guru that it has always been. That was temporarily dethroned because of Western and Middle Eastern colonizations. Most of the conversations on decolonization, unfortunately and ironically, happen, with colonial jargons and are seldom focused on how each and every one of us can practice decolonization in our daily lives. Ma'am wonderfully spoke of how, we need to stand up, speak for ourselves, and how we need to empower ourselves to empower Bharat. Right? I think we had a lot of takeaways from this interaction in that respect. To truly decolonize ourselves, we have to shed inhibitions, stand our ground, and not fall for fake and fancy packaged narratives of the colonizers. So I once again thank you, ma'am, for interacting with us.
I'm tired from sitting down and speaking to someone monologue. So can you all stand up and do a little bit of young people? Stand on your toes and down. This is the whole thing I do with young people. Okay, put your hands up. Okay, bend down. Okay. Now we can all
I call upon Rashmi and Mr. Anil to felicitate.
Sit down.
Please stand up for a minute. I think it's been very tedious and everyone's lost their energy. You're young people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.